You were 17 years old when you wrote the poem. It was 1900. The Qing court had fled Beijing and left the city to 8 foreign armies. You did not know yet what you would become. You knew only what you had read, the poems of martyrs who died for a China that had not yet been born. Men who walked to their executions with ink still on their fingers. You wrote in their style because you had no other style. You wrote about sacrifice. You wrote about the nation. You did not know then that 40 years later, you would be the name those same poets were used against. The poem is still in the record. It survived everything. You are sitting now in a room in Nanjing, March 1940, and the poem is not in this room, but you know every line of it, the way you know the sound of your own breathing. There is a document on the table in front of you. It has been there since yesterday. You have not signed it yet. The signing is tomorrow. Everyone in the building knows what the signing is. The Japanese delegation knows. The men in your own government know. The couriers waiting in the corridor outside know. What they do not know, what no record will preserve, is what you are doing right now, in this room, with the lamp turned low and the document still unsigned on the table. You are reading it again, not because you do not know what it says. You wrote parts of it yourself. You are reading it because reading is the last thing you can do before the irreversible begins, and you are not yet certain you are ready to stop reading. There is a letter in your coat pocket that you have carried for 11 years. It was written to you by Sun Yat-sen in 1913, in the year after the Republic failed the first time, and you were both in exile in Japan, sitting in borrowed rooms, trying to understand how a revolution becomes a government and what you lose in the translation. He wrote to you in his hand, not typed, not dictated, his own hand. And what he wrote was not about strategy or politics. It was about patience. He believed the thing you were building would outlast the men who were trying to destroy it. He died in 925. He died before he could watch what happened to the thing he built. You have carried the letter because you have not been able to put it down. Not because of what it says, because of the handwriting. Because the man who wrote it in that handwriting believed, completely and without reservation, that you were one of the people capable of carrying the thing forward. You fold the letter. You put it back in your pocket. You do not read it tonight. Japan controls the coast. Japan controls the major railways. Japan controls Shanghai, Nanjing, Canton, Wuhan. The national government, under Chiang Kai-shek, has retreated to Chongqing and is conducting a war of attrition from a position of catastrophic disadvantage. The rural population between the Japanese occupation zones and the nationalist rear areas is not a military asset in any conventional sense. It is a population being consumed by a war that neither side has the capacity to end quickly. You have seen the reports, not the military reports. Those are available to anyone with a secure briefing. You have seen the reports from the counties, from the village-level administrators who still filed their paperwork, because bureaucracies file paperwork even when everything else has stopped working. Hunan, 1913. Hubei, 1930. What happens to a civilian population when 2 armies operate in the same territory for years, without resolution? This is what you tell yourself. This is what you have told yourself for 2 years, since the first conversations with Japanese intermediaries in 1938, since the flight from Chongqing, since the communiques that were denied and the statements that were walked back and the slow, ugly machinery of arriving at this table. You tell yourself that a government in Nanjing, even this government, even under these conditions, is better than no government in the occupied territories. That someone has to negotiate, that the alternative to negotiation is the continued consumption of a population that has no more to give. You tell yourself this clearly. You tell it to yourself the way you would argue it to an audience, because you have been an orator your whole life, and this is the form your thoughts take. Arguments, structured, with evidence. The argument is correct. You believe the argument is correct. What you cannot determine, sitting in this room, is whether the argument is the reason you are here, or whether the argument is what you have constructed to explain why you are here. These are not the same thing. You know they are not the same thing. You have known the difference your whole life. In 1910, you were arrested in Beijing for plotting to assassinate the Prince Regent. You were 27 years old. The assassination failed. You were captured. The sentence should have been death. Instead, through a sequence of events that history records and that you have never fully understood, you were imprisoned and then released when the Qing dynasty fell the following year. You wrote a poem in a prison. It is also in the record. It is the most famous thing you wrote before the revolution succeeded, and you became a politician instead of a poet. The last lines, translated, say something approximately like this: I smile as I go to my death. The sound of cannon will wake the sleeping nation. You did not die. The cannons did wake something for a while. The poem outlasted the clarity that produced it. The men in the room with you when the Japanese intermediaries first approached you in 1938, You remember their faces more clearly than their arguments. Gao Zhongwu, who had negotiated back channels for Chiang before the split and knew the Japanese foreign ministry better than most. Zhou Longshang, who had been in Shanghai during the massacres and had a particular quality of silence when certain things were discussed. You remember that Zhou kept his hands very still on the table. You remember thinking that a man who keeps his hands still in that kind of conversation has already decided something. You had not yet decided. You told yourself you had not yet decided. The approach was this. A negotiated peace was possible. Japan did not want to occupy China indefinitely. The cost was too high, the resistance too persistent, the international position too complicated. What Japan wanted was a settlement that preserved its economic interests and withdrew the formal apparatus of military occupation. A Chinese government in Nanjing that could sign such a settlement would serve Japanese interests. It would also, this was the argument you were being given, serve Chinese interests, because the alternative was the continuation of a war that China was not winning. You asked what the terms would be. They told you the terms were negotiable. You asked what negotiable meant in this context. They said it meant that a government willing to sign would have influence over the final content of what it signed. You knew what that meant. You had been a politician for 30 years. Negotiable meant there would be terms you could not change, and the question was whether the terms you could change were worth the terms you could not. This is always what negotiable means. This is the entire substance of politics. You told them you would think about it. You thought about it for 2 years. In 1927, in Shanghai, Chiang ordered the massacre of Communist Party members and their affiliated labor organizers. The figure most commonly cited is in the thousands. You were in the Nationalist government at that time. You opposed the massacre. You said publicly that it was wrong. You resigned from your positions in protest. You came back. That is also in the record. A year later, more or less. The specifics of why you came back are recorded in various places and interpreted in various ways. What is not in the record is the conversation you had with yourself in the year between leaving and returning, what it cost you to leave, what it cost you to return, which cost you found more bearable. You returned because you believed the nationalist movement, with all its failures, was the structure through which China had the best chance of becoming the thing Sun Yat-sen had described. You returned because you believed that staying outside was a purity that helped no one. You believed this then. You constructed the same argument from the same components. You made the same calculation. The lamp in this room is oil, not electric. Nanjing in 1940 has electricity in parts of the city, but this building, this room, uses oil lamps because the Japanese administrators requested it for a meeting earlier this week, and no one changed it back. The smell of the oil is not unpleasant. It is the smell of every room you worked in before the age of 40, before the revolution stabilized enough for cities to invest in infrastructure, before everything became modern and then became ruins. You look at the document establishing the Reorganized National Government of the Republic of China. The seal is already prepared. The press conference is scheduled for tomorrow. The communique has been drafted in 3 languages. The Japanese are not formally here. They are present, but not officially present, because the fiction being maintained is that this is a Chinese government acting of its own accord, which is true in the narrow sense and false in every sense that matters. You know both things simultaneously. This is not unusual. You have known contradictory things simultaneously your entire career. The capacity to hold contradictory facts in the same mind without resolving them prematurely is, you have always believed, what distinguishes a serious politician from an idealist. Sun Yat-sen was an idealist. He resolved contradictions by believing that the right side would eventually prevail. He was right often enough that his method seemed to work. He also died before he saw what happened when it did not. There is a name that appears in your mind that you do not allow to appear for long. Wang Jingwei. She is not famous to most people. She is famous to people who know classical Chinese history, which you do because you were trained in it before you were trained in politics. Wang Jingwei was a Han Dynasty court lady who was sent to marry a Xiongnu chieftain as part of a peace arrangement, offered as a diplomatic gesture, a human instrument of the state's calculation that peace with the northern tribes was worth the price of one woman's life trajectory. She became, in Chinese literary tradition, the symbol of sacrifice for the nation, and also the symbol of the individual consumed by the state's convenience, and also the symbol of the woman who had no choice and made something of the absence of choice, and also simply a woman who lived in a place she had not chosen among people who were not hers. She has been all of these things in different poems written about her across 2,000 years. You are not Wang Jingwei. You are not being sent anywhere. You are choosing. You have the document in front of you and you will sign it tomorrow morning, and you know this. But the name appeared, and you let it appear for a moment, and now you put it away. The reorganized government will have administrative authority over occupied territories in name. In practice, the Japanese military administration will retain operational control over anything that matters to Japanese military and economic objectives. You will have influence at the margins. You will negotiate concessions on specific points. Some of these concessions will matter to specific people in specific places. An administrator reinstated, a prisoner released, a requisition reduced. Some of them will not matter at all. Chiang Kai-shek's government in Chongqing will denounce you. The communists will denounce you. The international press, to the extent it covers China, will describe you as a puppet. The question you cannot answer, sitting in this room, is how many people will not die because of the specific concessions you managed to negotiate over the next 4 years. You cannot calculate this. No one can calculate this. It is not the kind of thing that gets recorded in the form that would allow for a later accounting. What gets recorded is who signed what and when. What does not get recorded is the village administrator who was able to keep his post because someone in Nanjing made a call, and the 300 people in that county who had someone to negotiate on their behalf because the administrator was still there. You know this is how you are reasoning. You know that this reasoning is unfalsifiable. You know that unfalsifiable reasoning is the kind of reasoning that allows a person to do almost anything. You have known this for a long time. You do not resolve it. You sit with it in this room until the lamp burns lower. The scratch of the pen will be very quiet. You have signed many documents. You know what it sounds like. The scratch of a good pen on good paper in a quiet room is almost nothing. A small, dry, private sound. Nothing that announces itself. The document will not look different after you sign it than it did before. The room will not change. The lamp will not change. Outside this building, in the city, there are people who will not know for weeks what was signed tonight. There are people in provinces to the north who will not know for months. There are people who will spend the rest of their lives debating what it meant, and whether it was necessary, and whether it helped or harmed the specific population it claimed to protect. You will be dead by 1944. The reorganized government will not survive the war. The terms you negotiated will be rendered irrelevant by the Japanese defeat. The record will remember the signing and not the negotiations. The record will remember your name, and not the argument you made to yourself in this room on this night. You know some version of this is coming. You do not know the precise shape of it. You are 56 years old. You entered politics as a revolutionary. You survived an assassination attempt. You were imprisoned. You wrote poems about dying for China when you were young enough to believe that dying for something was the clearest possible form of meaning. You spent 30 years in the machinery of the Nationalist government, the feuding, the purges, the retreats, the reconsolidations, the long labor of trying to make a nation out of a country that kept collapsing under the weight of what that required. Sun Yat-sen's letter is in your pocket. You do not take it out again. You reach across the table. You do not touch the document. You move the lamp slightly so the light falls on it more directly. You look at it for another moment. Tomorrow you will sign it. You have known this for weeks. You are here because you have known this for weeks. The reading and the sitting and the lamp and the letter in the pocket are not uncertainty. They are the form that certainty takes in a person who has not yet given themselves permission to stop asking whether it is certainty or whether it is the argument that produced the certainty. These are not the same thing. You look at the document. In 1900 you were 17, and you wrote a poem about sacrifice, and you did not know yet what the word cost. You know now. You are not certain that knowing changes anything. You are not certain it was supposed to. The lamp burns. The document waits. Outside, the city is quiet in the particular way of cities under occupation. Not peaceful, not at rest, but held. You sit with it a little longer.